Picture yourself in Skagway, Alaska, in the summer of 1898, at the wild, raw edge of the Klondike gold rush. You have crossed a cold sea to get here, packed shoulder to shoulder with 1,000 other dreamers, and Skagway is the door you must pass through on your way to the gold fields beyond the mountains. It is a town that did not exist a year ago and now roars day and night. A mile of mud and raw timber, saloons throwing yellow light onto the boardwalk, the whole place smelling of sawdust and whiskey, and the sweat of men in a hurry to get rich. You have your whole life savings sewn into your coat, and your heart is high because you are almost there. But before you march north into the wilderness, there is one thing you must do. You must send a telegram home. Your wife is 1,000 miles away and frightened for you, and you promised her, the moment you landed safe, you would wire her word. So you find it right there on the main street, a neat little office with a sign, a counter, a clerk in a clean collar, and a wire running up to a pole outside and off into the sky. You step in. You write your message, safe, arrived, love you, home by spring. The clerk counts the words, takes your $5, taps it out on the key and tells you to wait. And you do wait, and while you wait, a wonderful thing happens. A reply comes back. Your wife has answered. She is well, she loves you, and the clerk says, reading it off, she asks you to wire a little money home for she is short this month. And of course you do. You are a good husband. You pay to send it. And here is the thing that should stop you cold, the thing this whole evening is about. There was no reply from your wife because your message never went anywhere because there was no telegraph line out of Skagway at all. Not one wire connected that town to the outside world. The pole outside ran up into the sky and stopped. The clerk was an actor. The office was a stage set. And the tender reply from the wife who missed you was written in the back room by the very men who had just taken your $5, and who now, through her loving words, were reaching into your coat for more. Evening. I'm Eddie. Come in, hang your coat, sit yourself down by the lamp, and mind you keep a hand on your wallet tonight, because the fellow I want to introduce you to is, I think, the most complete con man who ever worked the American frontier, and complete is exactly the word for him. If you've not sat with me before, here's the shape of my little vice. I collect swindlers, forgers, imposters, sellers of things they never owned, the whole glorious rogues gallery of history's cleverest liars. I take them down off the shelf one at a time, and you and I hold them up to the lamplight and marvel at the nerve of the human animal. I'm a fan, I admit it freely. Never pulled a real con in my life. The nearest my mate Sully and I ever came was talking our way into a hotel breakfast buffet we had not paid for, on the strength of 2 confident nods and a room number Sully invented on the spot. And we got away clean with a full plate each before either of us lost his nerve. So no, I'm not the operator. I'm the fellow in the cheap seats, leaning forward, whispering how did he do that. And tonight's man did it for 20 years in 3 different towns, and he never really got caught, not by a court anyway. His name was Jefferson Randolph Smith II, born in Georgia in 1860, and the world knew him as Soapy Smith. He was a confidence man, and more than that, a boss of organized crime out on the frontier when the frontier was still being made. And by the end, he did not merely break the law in the town of Skagway. He was the law. He ran the whole place like a shadow government, with the con man sitting where the mayor should sit. And the beautiful, terrible secret of Soapy Smith, the thing I want you to see by the end of tonight, is that his greatest swindle was not the soap, and it was not the fake telegraph office. His greatest swindle was respectability itself. Now let me show you how a man cons a whole town into protecting him. It starts, as the best cons do, with something small and clever, and it starts with soap. That is where the name comes from, and the trick that earned it is a jewel, so let me set it out for you plainly. Picture a busy street corner in Denver, Colorado in the 1880s. A sharp-dressed young man sets up a little display case on a tripod, a crowd gathers, and he begins to sell soap. Ordinary bars of soap. But watch his hands. As he talks, and he talks beautifully, this man, warm and quick and funny, he takes up the bars one at a time and in full view wraps some of them in paper money before wrapping the paper over that. A $1 bill here, a 5 there, a 10, a 20, and then, right in front of you, a $100 bill, folded around a bar of soap and papered over, an enormous sum for a working man in that day. He shuffles the wrapped bars together in the case, and then he offers them for sale, $1, say, or 5. The point being that any bar you buy might have a fortune folded inside it. And you watch, and you hesitate, and then a man near the front buys a bar, tears it open, and shouts with delight. A $50 bill, right there in his hand, held up for all to see. Well, that does it. The crowd surges forward, money out, everyone grabbing for the bars because you have just seen with your own 2 eyes an ordinary fellow win $50 for a $1 soap. That is proof, isn't it? You saw it. And here is the trick, the whole quiet engine of it. The man who won the $50 was no stranger. He worked for Soapy. He was what the trade calls a shill, a planted accomplice whose entire job is to win in public so that the real marks will lose in private, and the bars with the real money folded inside them. By a little sleight of hand, those went only to the shills, or vanished back into a pocket, so that the bars left in the case for you and me to buy held nothing but soap. You paid your $1, you tore your paper with a thumping heart, and you found a bar of soap. That is the prize package soap sells, Swindle, and it is where the nickname Soapy was born. And notice already the shape of the thing, because it is the shape of his whole life. The con did not work by hiding from your eyes. It worked by giving your eyes exactly what they wanted to see. A winner. Proof. Somebody just like you getting lucky. He did not defeat your suspicion. He fed your hope. Now, a clever man can run the soap racket on a street corner for pocket money. But Soapy Smith was not after pocket money. He was after something far grander, and this is where he steps up from swindler to boss. Because the soap sell, and a dozen other short cons like it, funded something bigger, a whole organization. In Denver, and later in the boomtown of Creede, Colorado, Soapy built himself a criminal operation with him at the top, and a small army of grifters, gamblers, and thugs beneath him. He ran saloons. The Tivoli Club was the famous one, and inside them the games were rigged, the dice were loaded, the wheels were gaffed, the fake lotteries paid out only to his own men. Above the door of the Tivoli, the story goes, he hung a sign in Latin that meant roughly, "Let the buyer beware, a joke, a dare," hiding in plain sight, telling you to your face that you were about to be robbed and trusting that you'd walk in anyway. And in they walked. But here is where Soapy becomes interesting, genuinely interesting, and steps clear of every ordinary crook. Because a man running rigged games needs one thing above all else more than clever hands, more than a good sign over the door. He needs the law to leave him alone. And Soapy understood, earlier and better than almost anyone, that you do not buy that safety by hiding from the law. You buy it by owning the law. In Denver, he became a power behind the local politics, cultivating officials, delivering votes, greasing the machine, making himself a man the powerful found it convenient to keep sweet. He built a network of protection stitched right into the respectable town, so that when a mark complained of being cheated, the complaint went nowhere because the men who should have acted on it were Soapy's men. He was not a rat in the walls of the city. He was becoming one of its landlords. And when Denver grew too hot, when reformers finally began pushing back and the pressure rose, he simply moved his whole apparatus to where the money was fresh. In 1892, the silver mining boomtown of Creede, Colorado, exploded almost overnight into a roaring camp of thousands, and Soapy went to it like water finding its level. He set up his saloons and his rigged games, installed his own men, and for a season he was, in every way that counted, the boss of Creede, the man you saw if you wanted to open a business, the man whose word settled disputes, the uncrowned king of a town that had no crown to give. It was a dress rehearsal, though nobody knew it yet, for the far greater performance still to come. Learn the pattern because it repeats. Find the rush, ride in early, own the vice, and buy the respectability on top. And then came the masterpiece. In 1897, gold was struck in the Klondike, up in the Canadian Yukon, and the world went mad. Tens of thousands of ordinary people, clerks, farmers, shopkeepers who had never held a pick, sold everything they owned and stampeded north, and nearly all of them had to pass through one narrow gate, the raw new port of Skagway, Alaska. A river of hopeful, frightened, cash-heavy strangers pouring through a lawless town at the end of the earth. For a man like Soapy Smith, it was the promised land. He moved north, and within months he did not just work Skagway. He took it. He owned it. He ran it. And the cons he built there are so good, so cold, so perfectly designed that I could talk about them all night. I've already shown you the first, the telegraph office, the one you walked into at the start of the evening. Sit with how complete that swindle is. A whole office staffed with a counter and a clerk and a wire running up a pole, and not 1 inch of that wire connected to anything, because there was no telegraph service out of Skagway at all in those days. You paid your $5 to send a message into the void. And this is the flourish. This is the part that tells you you're dealing with an artist. A reply would come back warm and personal, often asking you to send money. It cost him nothing to invent a loving answer from a wife or a father hundreds of miles away, and it doubled his take, and it worked because you wanted, more than anything in that cold and frightening place, to hear that someone at home was thinking of you. And that was one racket among many. There were the rigged games in his saloon, the Jeff Smith's parlor. There were shell games and 3-card Monte run by his men in the street, roping in the greenhorns fresh off the boats. And there was, when the war with Spain broke out in 1898 and patriotic feeling ran high, a fake army recruiting office. Picture it. A young man, full of feeling for his country, comes to volunteer. He is welcomed, taken to a back room to be examined and sworn in, told to strip for his physical, and while he stands there in his shirt, his clothes, his wallet, and his poke of gold are quietly rifled and lifted. He came to give his life for the flag, and he left robbed by men wearing the flag as a costume. That is the cold genius of Soapy Smith. He did not just find your greed the way the soap cell did. He found whatever you loved most, your wife, your country, your hope, and he built a little stage set around it, and he charged you to stand on it. Now, here is where I have to slow down and turn the whole thing over, because if you take away one idea tonight, take away this one. It is the reason Soapy Smith is not just another crook on my shelf, but something close to the purest specimen in the whole collection. The soap was not the con. The fake telegraph was not the con. Those were the tricks, the visible, clever, hand-quick tricks that took your $5 or your $50. The real con, the long con, the one that let all the little ones run for years without a cell door ever closing on him, was respectability itself. Because while Soapy Smith was robbing Skagway with one hand, with the other he was making himself beloved by it. He gave money to build churches. He fed men who were down and out and starving in that hard town. He paid for the funerals of strangers who died broke. He adopted stray dogs. He was charming, generous, endlessly public-spirited, a fixture at every civic occasion, a man who would stand you a drink and lend you $1 and ask after your mother. To a great many decent people in Skagway, Soapy Smith was not a criminal at all. He was a benefactor, a leading citizen, practically the town father. And do you see what that buys a man? It buys him cover no lawyer could ever provide. Because when a fleeced prospector went to complain that he'd been robbed, he was not just complaining about some anonymous sharper. He was accusing the man who paid for the church, who fed the hungry, who everyone liked. And the town, protecting the respectable face it had grown so fond of, would sooner disbelieve the victim than the benefactor. Soapy had made himself into a pillar of the community, and a community will fight to protect its own pillars, even when the pillar is the very thing eating the house from the inside. That is the inversion, and it is breathtaking once you see it. The frontier is usually described as a place with no law, but Skagway's problem was not that it had no law. Its problem was that the con man had become the law, running the police, the courts, the politics, the charity, and the underworld all at once, a shadow government with a smile. The soap cell was just the tell, the little visible trick that gives the game away if you're watching. The real mark was never the greenhorn with the $5. The real mark was the whole town. And now I have to do the thing I always do, the thing that matters more with Soapy Smith than with almost anyone else on my shelf, because his life has been told and retold and embroidered for more than 100 years, until the legend grew a great deal taller than the man. So let me name my witness carefully, and let me separate what we actually know from what makes a good campfire story. The single best guide to the real Soapy Smith is a man named Jeff Smith, a descendant of the family and the most dedicated biographer Soapy has ever had, whose book, alias Soapy Smith, The Life and Death of a Scoundrel, is the closest thing there is to a documented account. And what makes his work so valuable, and why I trust it, is that being family did not make him a booster. Just the opposite. He did the patient, unglamorous work of going to the records, the newspapers of the day, the letters, the court and town documents, precisely in order to separate what can be proven from the pile of colorful tales that attach themselves to the Soapy name over the decades. And there are a great many of those tales. So let me be honest with you about the line between them, because I would be a poor sort of guide if I handed you legend dressed as fact. What is solid, what the record supports, is the shape of the thing, the soap swindle and the nickname it earned, the rackets and rigged saloons in Denver and in Creede, the criminal grip on Skagway during the gold rush, the telegraph con and the network of games and grifts, the careful public face of the charitable civic man, and the violent end I'm about to tell you. That much is well documented, but a lot of the vivid detail, the exact words of this or that famous quip, the precise figures robbed, the neat little scenes where Soapy says something perfect at the perfect moment, a lot of that is folklore, polished by a century of retelling, and the honest biographer flags it as such rather than swearing to it. I'll do the same. When I tell you a detail is loved but unproven, believe that I mean it, because the whole lesson of tonight is what happens when we stop checking. But every shadow government rests on the town's willingness to look away, and in the end, Skagway stopped looking away. Because a con built on respectability has one great weakness. It works only so long as the respectable people believe in the face. And in the summer of 1898, the face finally cracked. A returning prospector, fresh down from the gold fields with a poke of gold said to be worth a great deal of money, was fleeced by Soapy's men in one of the rigged games. And for whatever reason, the size of it, the timing, the sheer brazenness, this one was the robbery too far. The decent citizens of Skagway, the very people who had tolerated Soapy for a year because he was charming and generous and useful, had finally had enough. They formed a vigilance committee, a group history remembers as the Committee of 101, and they called a meeting on the evening of the 8th of July to decide what to do about the man who ran their town. Soapy Smith, being Soapy Smith, would not sit quietly while the town he owned turned against him. He picked up a rifle and marched down toward the wharf where the committee had posted a guard, meaning, it seems, to break the meeting up by sheer force of nerve, the same nerve that had carried him through 20 years of cons. And at the end of the Juneau Wharf he came face to face with a guard named Frank Reid. There were hot words, and then the two men shot each other. Soapy Smith was hit and died there on the wharf, more or less at once, at the age of 37. Frank Reid, badly wounded in the same exchange, lingered in pain for some days and then died as well. The town buried them both, the con man and the man who stopped him, and one of them Skagway remembered as a hero. It was not the one who had paid for the churches. The shadow government fell in a few seconds of gunfire at the end of a wooden pier, and the long con of Soapy Smith, which no court had ever managed to close, was closed at last by a town that finally stopped believing the face. So let's ask the real question, the one underneath all of it. Not how did he rig a game of soap, that's the easy question and probably the wrong one. The real question is worse. How did one man rob a whole town in plain sight for a year, while that same town liked him, defended him, and called him a benefactor? How does the mark end up protecting the swindler? And the uncomfortable answer is the same one that runs through every con I keep on this shelf. Only Soapy worked it more completely than anyone. Rule one of any con, my friend. You do not overcome the mark's suspicion. You enlist the mark's trust. You do not sneak past the guard. You get the guard to hold the door for you and thank you as you pass. And the fastest way to a person's trust is not cleverness. It's the appearance of goodness. A man who funds your church and feeds your poor and buries your dead has, in your mind, already answered the question of whether he can be trusted, and he has answered it long before he ever deals you a rigged hand. The charity was not a soft spot in Soapy's operation. The charity was the operation. Every dollar he gave to a church bought him $10 of the one thing money can't directly buy, the benefit of the doubt. He wrapped the ugliest business on the frontier in the most respectable paper he could find, exactly the way he wrapped a bar of plain soap in a $100 bill. And the town bought the package for the same reason the crowd bought the soap, because it looked, on the outside, like the very thing they were hoping for. And here is why I really keep this one, why I didn't just tell it to you for the gold rush glamour of it. Because it is about you and me a great deal more than it is about one dead swindler on an Alaskan wharf. We like to think we'd have spotted him. We picture the con man as the obvious villain, the shifty stranger, the too slick pitch, the offer that's plainly too good. And so we watch for that, we guard against that, and we feel safe. But Soapy Smith is proof that the guarding is aimed at the wrong door, because the swindle that actually gets you is almost never the one wearing the villain's face. It's the one wearing the respectable one, the badge, the title, the charity gala, the warm civic smile, the institution that funds the good cause and sponsors the little league and gives generously and is, therefore, in your mind above suspicion, which is precisely why, when it robs you, you'll defend it before you'll believe the victim. We do not check the people who look good. That is the whole trick. Respectability is not proof of honesty. It never was. It is only a costume, and it happens to be the most expensive and most effective costume a con man can wear, and Soapy Smith wore it better than anyone. Look around at your own world and you'll see the soap sell everywhere, just in better suits. The company that pours money into looking ethical while it quietly picks your pocket and dares you to accuse something so generous. The charming figure of unquestioned standing who gets away with it for years, because who would believe such a thing of such a pillar? The polished institution you'd trust on sight and never once audit, precisely because it looks like the thing you were hoping to trust. Every one of them is running Soapy's Real Con, the long one, the respectable one. They have folded the plain soap into the $100 wrapper, and they are counting on the fact that you will judge the package by its paper. And notice the cruelest part of the design, the part Soapy understood in his bones. The respectable con does not just protect the swindler from you. It turns you against the person who tries to warn you. When the fleeced man in Skagway stood up and said the generous, church-building gentleman had just robbed him at his own table, the town's first instinct was not to doubt Soapy. It was to doubt the victim, to think him a sore loser, a troublemaker, a liar slandering a fine man. The better the respectable face, the more the honest accuser looks like the villain. That is why these cons run for years. It isn't only that we fail to suspect the pillar. It's that we turn on the ones who do, right up until the day the face finally cracks and we all pretend we saw it coming. The little tricks, the soap, the loaded dice, the fake wire home, those we can learn to spot. It's the respectable face over the top of them that we still, 120 years later, wave straight through the gate. So that's my question for you tonight too, really. And I do read the comments, so come down and find me. First, have you ever trusted something or someone because they simply looked respectable? The title, the uniform, the good reputation, the generous public face. And had it turn out that the respectable face was the whole disguise? What was it, and what finally cracked the face for you, the way that last robbery cracked it for Skagway? And second, the flip side, the one I'm greedy for. Have you ever been the suspicious one, the person who distrusted somebody everybody else adored, who wouldn't be charmed by the charity and the smile, and turned out to be right? Did anyone thank you, or did they think you a sourpuss for doubting such a nice, generous, upstanding soul? Tell me both. The respectable face that fooled you, and the time you refused to be fooled by one. Those stories keep the rest of us honest. Put them below. And if you like sitting in the cheap seats with me, taking history's greatest cons apart to see what makes them tick, subscribe, and stick around, because there's a new one every few days, and I've a whole gallery of beautiful liars still to introduce you to. The man who sold a monument he did not own, the forger who fooled an empire and got paid for it, the impostor who convinced a whole nation to obey a second-hand costume. My nephew, sharp lad, thinks he's uncatchable, and last year he very nearly handed his bank details to a message that arrived looking perfectly respectable. The right logo, the polite official tone, a warning from what appeared to be his own bank, generous and helpful and concerned for his safety. He caught himself with his thumb over the button, and only because for 1 second he stopped asking, does this look trustworthy, and started asking, have I actually checked that it is? That one question is the whole defense. It always has been. I'll leave you with this. The most dangerous con is never the one that looks like a con. It's the one that looks like a good citizen, that funds the church, feeds the poor, wears the badge, and smiles at you across the civic hall. Soapy Smith robbed a whole town while the town called him a benefactor, and no court ever caught him. Only a town that finally stopped trusting the face ever did. So the next time you find yourself trusting something purely because it looks respectable, purely because it does good in public and everybody likes it, do the one small, slightly embarrassing, faintly rude thing that Skagway took a year too long to do. Don't just admire the wrapper. Check what's folded inside. I'm Eddie. Mind the charming strangers, and mind the respectable benefactors most of all. And that's how you lose your shirt.